Hello and welcome to my channel Inch by Inch Art. This is part 2 of the Making All the Snakes Druid Dilemma series. I'm now painting the snakes. I'm using this Dragon Flash colored Color Shift paint from Folkart to paint my flying snake. I've decided that this is going to be the body color, primarily because the description in the book says that they are multicolored snakes, and I loved the color Dragon Flash but haven't used it on anything yet. And here is my Plum Flash Color Shift Folkart paint. I use this on the wings and the tail. This was really tricky to film because it's so small and my camera was having some difficulty focusing on the actual piece and on my hands. I have to use my finest tipped brush to do all of this because this is a tiny creature. It is very, very small, and that is a 1-inch base that I'm painting my miniature on. If you'd like to see the sculpting process and missed it, you can watch part 1. This is part of my Druid Dilemma series. This one was all of the snakes I decided to do in one video. So I've got the first video, part 1 is sculpting, and part 2 is this one just painting. So since it's a flying snake, I thought that the base would be best to have painted to look like the sky. So I did a light blue base, and then I added a little bit watered down white before the blue had dried so that it could have like a really neat cloud texture. And here I am just adding a black wash on the eyes, and then I'm gonna go over the whole body because I did do a scale texture. So I put the black wash on a bit heavy, but then I go back and have just wet my brush to pull back some of the black so it's not too dark. I didn't think it would make a whole lot of sense if it was super dark while flying in the sky. I don't know, it just didn't quite seem right to me, so I did pull it back a little bit. There it is painted. Moving on to my next one, this is a small venomous snake. So this I painted based off of a pygmy rattlesnake. I did pose it as a rattlesnake and I gave it a little rattle as well. Pygmy rattlesnakes are pretty neat. They're shades of gray, and then they generally have this orangey red stripe going all the way down their backs, which I really liked. When I make these creatures, even though it's a fantasy game, I like to pull from real life examples when I can. Sometimes they'll just be general inspiration, other times I'll get more literal with it, so like these I got quite literal. Here I'm painting the base. These snakes are generally found on the ground in woods, so I decided that I would go for a woody colored paint. I didn't do textures with these bases because I thought that I really wanted the animal to be the key focus. Sometimes I do add some textures to the base, but these I just decided that I would paint only. So I did a brown with a light black wash to give it some depth. Next, moving on to my medium-sized creature, which is a venomous snake. I think they call them poisonous snakes in the book now that I think about it, which is silly because they're not poisonous. They're venomous, but whatever. So for this one, my inspiration was a spectacled cobra, and I used some reference images to just get an idea of how I was going to paint my cobra. I did a base of a gray, and then I painted on, they tend to have like a white collar, and then they have the white on their throats and then the back where the spectacled part is. I did a brown dry brush to just make the scales pop and give it a bit of a different color to it, because they are kind of it's sort of a hard color to describe from what I saw. It was sort of like a brownish gray. And here I am just painting on the spectacled part with black. And then I do a light black wash to make the eyes and scales pop. Also to give a little bit of shadow around where it's coiled, so it seeps into where the coils are and gives them more depth. And then for the space, I did similar to what I did with the rattlesnake, and I just did a lighter brown base. They tend to live in sandy areas, so I gave them a lighter brown. Moving on to my next creature, this is my rainbow boa inspired piece. This is the Constrictor Snake, which is a large creature. So for this one, I used my Folkart Color Shift red flash paint. It's a bit pink, but the flash to it is a purple, and rainbow boas have, well, like a rainbow iridescence. I couldn't quite capture it the way I wanted, but I think that the color shift was the right way to go, because it did give it an iridescence. So rainbow boas have really interesting patterns. They're beautiful snakes. They've got these circles all the way down their bodies and really striking markings of lines on their faces. So I did my best to mimic that pattern. Here I've decided to put on a white wash. I've noticed on looking at a lot of reference images that they tend to have very light coloring between their scales. So I thought a white wash would be quite unique and different and give it a similar look as it made the scale texture pop. And then I just added a little bit of a black wash to where the spine was and some details around the face because they do have those sensory pits around their face as well. For the base, I decided to go with a dark green. They live in very green forested areas. They're frequently up in trees, so I just felt the forest green color would go the best. Now that that's done, I'm moving on to my last mini, which is my Anaconda or Giant Constrictor Snake. This is a huge creature, so it's pretty big for a mini, 3" by 3" base. And as you can see, I did a pretty watered down lime green color. I did mix these paints. These are all just cheap acrylic paints, except for the Color Flash Folk Arts. I just buy them at the dollar store. They work fine for minis. They're not the greatest with pigment. Sometimes you have to do multiple coats, but frequently I find that works just fine for minis because you have to do multiple coats no matter what. So once I've done a dark muddy brown for my base, which is supposed to be reminiscent of the muddy waters that anacondas hang out in, I've moved on to the facial details. I believe I did 3 coats of the watered down green for the body before I got to this point. So I do the red head markings right behind their eyes, and then I painted the eyes brown. This is a watered down pea green color. Anacondas have different shades of green in their bodies. They're very muddy looking on the top, and then they're quite yellow on their bellies. And this is just another hand mixed color that I made. I believe it was brown, yellow, and green. Here I'm adding on the yellow details. Again, their bellies are what's yellow, so I just did the very edge along the whole bottom of the body that you can see of the mini. Here I'm adding some black details. Anacondas generally have black spots going down their body and then some markings on their face. And the pupils, and very watered down black for the spots all down the body. Their spots are not perfectly round, so I felt that a watered down black would move easier while I was painting. And then I go back over the black just down towards the belly with yellow, because they do have more yellow towards the bottom, and they do have this sort of pattern based off of reference images that I looked at. And now that all the rest of the paint is dry, it's time for a black wash to bring out those details. I go over the entire body to make those scales really pop, and all of the details that I had on the face. Now that they're all done being painted, I'm going to move on to the last little bit, which is my UV resin. This is my UV flashlight. And I'm just using a pipette to put a very small amount of resin on their eyes. I like to do this on my minis just because it's an added detail. Usually don't bother to do it on very small ones, but on these I just did it to all of them since I had them all together at the same time. And you can see here the tiny creatures were so small, I actually used my dental pick to apply the resin. Since when I was sculpting, I used the dotting tool to put holes where the eyes would be, the resin actually sunk right into those spots quite well. And time for the close-ups. Here they are all done. It's a nice little set of minis, and I've got all my snakes done, which means I can be any of these. Well, I hope you enjoyed that. That's the end of my All the Snakes for my Druid's Dilemma series. If you'd like to see more of my art, please like, follow, and subscribe.